Welcome to my presentation on podium results tracking for KIN 515. I'll be focusing on swimming, specifically the women's 200-meter backstroke over the last 3 Olympic Games. During that time, Canada happened to perform very well, winning a bronze medal in 2016, and most recently, by a different individual, a silver medal in the 2020 Tokyo Games. What is high performance? Well, Swimming Canada has defined high performance in the Olympic program as top 8 in world rankings with continual progression towards and the achievement of Olympic podium performances. And this assignment tasks us to identify the general podium pathway context using LTAD as a reference and other relevant competitions for athlete pathway benchmarks, to identify those performance benchmarks and prioritize those that appear to have the highest impact on performance. Well, one of those paths is identifying people inside Canada's world-class on-track time standards. These are updated every 4 years, which are gender and age specific for all the events. The on-track times are based on rates of progression of international top 30 ranked athletes in their respective disciplines. And there are percentage improvement curves that are built and individualized for the genders in the events. There are 3 different tracks. Track 1 is the fastest. It's based on Olympic and World Championship results in long course meters only, eliminating American collegiate short course world yard conversion percentage variables. Swimmers can enter the on-track time standards at any time at different age groups depending on the growth and development of the athlete and the time in their sport. And the goal is to move to track 1 and then to stay in track 1 throughout maturation. The goal of this tracking in general is to increase the probability that Swimming Canada and its resources are being invested into athletes with the highest potential. So here we have the female world-class on-track times and all the events. The males is different in the fact that the youngest age group starts 1 year younger than the females, with male maturation being 12 to 18 months behind the females. They start the youngest age group at 14. So here we have a chart that reflects the younger age groups not having the shorter distances to race and having on-track times to track them. The focus needs to be on longer distances, stroke efficiency, and aerobic conditioning in those age groups. So if you look at the 1500 free, there is a 13-year-old on track 1 time. In the 14-year-olds, there's track 1 and track 2. Other than backstroke, there are no other times for on-track females. And this is to give females time, no different than the guys at 14, time to get things moving and to get all their principles and their foundations in line. As they get a little bit older, the shorter distances come into play. If you look at the 100 freestyle, there are no times to be qualified as a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old. There's only track 1 for 15-year-old females. So this is trying to have everyone realize that you can have success in the longer distances in some of the other events. By not rewarding people who mature earlier or faster than some of the others, we have a greater ability to keep athletes into the sport a little bit longer. Swimming Canada has a long-term athlete development model that has been in place since 2008. It was exactly the same for roughly 10 years. They've made some modifications to it, and they added and they implemented it a new appropriate athlete development matrix in 2021. Appropriate athlete development by Swimming Canada has been identified as 4 strategies inside the LTAD: competition review, stage skill checklists, implications for clubs and parents, and NCCP integration for coaching upgrades and for updates. This new appropriate athlete matrix, development matrix, has 4 pillars: physical capabilities, technical, tactical, strategic competencies, mental or psychological skills, and life skills, cognitive, social, and emotional learning skills. The podium pathway is about developing high-performance athletes capable of winning at the highest levels of international competition and bringing home medals of Olympic Games, Paralympic Games, or World Championships. Recently, they've added the unique pathway. So it now states that athletes can and will join this pathway at different stages throughout their athletic career, depending on age, skill level, and previous sports. It's not a straight line. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Some athletes will move from one sport to another. Some will leave a sport for a while and then come back. And all those different pathways are totally fine as long as we're moving along the pathway. Specifically with men and women for our Olympic team in swimming, the men for the most part are in a train to compete. We are competing at the Olympics. We have a smaller male team than females based on the times needed to qualify for the Olympic team. And the Canadian women's swim team are definitely there to win. They're in a train to win position where the guys are training to compete. We have a bunch of new, younger males, roughly 18-year-olds that were just on the last Olympics. And as they keep moving along the podium pathway, hopefully they'll be in the train to win spot by Paris. Of the 26 swimmers on the team, there's a 37-year-old Brent Hayden who did sprint freestyle, and his career predated the National Development Team Protocol, and Summer McIntosh skipped the entire junior program entirely to qualify for her first junior national team along with another young lady. 21 of the other athletes were on some type of junior national team, a World Junior Championships in the pool or the open water, or Pan Pacific Championships, a Youth Olympics, or a Pan Am Games. There is a performance pathway that is geared towards giving the younger athletes the opportunity for some international competition before they make an Olympic team, a senior team. However, as stated, some athletes will skip over stuff and just move right on to the Olympic team. No subjective judging. Everything is measured but not always recorded. So swimming is a great sport for gathering data. It's consistent. The elements are pretty much all the same. The pool length, it's indoors. The water temperature is within 2 degrees all the time. The depth of the pool is always between 2.5 and 3 meters deep. The width of the lanes are consistent, and the pools are always built by one official company called Murtha. They're used for all the FINA events, and it's done that way because you can't have issues with currents in a pool. Obviously, the pool must have a system which will clean the water and filtrate it. However, often there are currents in the pool, and the same jet system, which obviously works, needs to be used for all Olympics and World Championships. This has been a problem in the past. In 2013 in Worlds in Barcelona, it was a huge issue where certain people in certain lanes, depending on the event, had a huge competitive advantage over others. So that's one of the reasons why FINA is really cracked down on trying to make everything consistent. Electronics are always the same company, Omega. The camera system is always the same as well. Obviously, in swimming, the difference in time is 1/100th of a second between a win or a loss. And we can't have any mistakes with that, obviously. All facilities must have a test event before they're FINA approved and sanctioned before they get to host an Olympics or a Worlds. Eliminating the variables. In Tokyo, it was super hot and humid outside, but inside it was nice and exactly the same as it was in Rio and London and Beijing. You can't always get what you want. There's a lot of data that I wanted to have for this assignment, and I wasn't able to get. I wanted the stats on the speeds going into all the turns. That wasn't available. The kick-out velocity and the time to the 15-meter mark off of all of the walls. I do have it, and I did use it off of the start. That was available for all the athletes for prelims, semis, and finals for all 3 Olympics. But that didn't exist for coming off of the walls, off the 50, the 100, and the 150 turn times. Those aren't out there to be used. Fragmented data is not very helpful when you're trying to do a 3 Olympic or a 3 cycle or a 2 full cycle assignment. There is some data coming through now that Swimming Canada is working on, but it's not finished. And because of that, I obviously can't use it. There isn't any data yet on 2016 or 2012. There was data that was created by FINA for 2013. And it was done so that all the athletes in all the countries that attended would have a bunch of stats. And it was published. It was wonderful. However, it's the only thing, it's all by itself, and there is nothing else out there to compare it to. Stroke rates throughout the races for all the athletes would be extremely helpful. And individualized countries seem to be holding on to this information themselves. I guess because it's so hard to get a hold of, FINA's not doing it. If Canada is going to spend a lot of time and energy on creating this data, they don't want to give it up to the Americans or the Australians or whoever it happens to be. So Swimming Canada is working on it. We just don't have the data yet. Stats that I did have, but don't have any impact on placings. So reaction time off the blocks. In the 200 backstroke, the difference between the fastest person and the slowest person, the reaction time was 0.23 seconds of a difference. There was one spot movement in the 3 Olympics in the final. It was 2016. It made a spot difference from 7th to 6th in the final time. It really didn't have any impact at all. The kick-out velocity to the 15 meters off the start, there's a 0.54 difference from the fastest person to the slowest person over the 3 Olympics. And this definitely will have an impact over the 100-meter backstroke. However, with the time differential being much greater in the 200 backstroke, it didn't make a difference at all. And placing for lanes, depending on what lane you're in, for finals it didn't make a difference because it goes back and forth between 2 lanes, there and back twice. There's no difference on the placings of the lanes and the impact for their final position. Benchmarks for the women's 200 backstroke, which I did create from the data that I was able to get, are the following. Progressions from prelims to semis to finals and the times associated with those movements. The first 50 split to the podium finish, the last 3 50s splitting in the order of importance, the last 50 lift, and splitting of the hundreds. So from the first 100 to the second 100, what's the difference? Are they even split, negative split, or positive split? So from prelims to semis to finals. Based purely on time, it's not like athletics where 2 people in semis automatically move forward into the next round and the rest are by time. This is purely based on time. There are 3 swims that have to be done inside of a 24-hour period of time in the 50s and the 100s and the 200s in the pool. So that's a lot of racing, a lot of conditioning, some opportunities to work on some different technical and tactical elements. However, it does have a huge impact on an athlete that can't just have a one-shot event. The women's 200 backstroke from prelims to semis to finals and the progression of it. So here we have time on the left and the placings along the bottom. Blue is preliminaries, red is semifinals, and then finals is the bottom line. And then, with the exception of the 8th place person, every single person had a progression from prelims to semis to finals. Some were greater and some were less. If you look at the 8th place person here, this was in Tokyo. This lady had a great preliminary swim, big best time to make it into finals. And then the other races were a little bit slower, but they were all within less than 0.4 of a second difference. So there wasn't like a big drop off in any way. But everyone else did actually progress from one round to the next. And that's obviously very important. Now, the people who are going in with the fastest times have potential a little bit more leeway on taking it easier in the first round. But everybody did increase their how fast they were as they went through the rounds. I put this in 3 different charts because Rio really narrowed the results, but there still is a difference for most of the people from the 3 different rounds. The 2nd place person here in Rio pretty much did the same time all 3 rounds, and 6th place and 7th place, same thing. They're all pretty much within the same range. Most of the people, though, are still able to actually make a move forward in drop time as they progress through the rounds. In London, 5 of the ladies were able to do it the same way. So this apps and the other ones are very, very close. So there definitely is a progression from one round to the next. First 50 split compared to podium final finish. Here we have time on your left, on your vertical axis, and placings along the bottom. The 3 different Olympics, and if we just look at, say, the blue, which is 2020, you'll see that the first 2 spots, they were out in under 29.5. The lady who placed 2nd overall was Canadian's Kylie Mass, and her race strategy was to take control of the race from the very beginning, which she did up until the 150 meter mark, which we'll come back and talk about a little bit later. So if you're not out first, if you're not out fast enough, you're not going to be able to close fast enough in order to be able to get on the podium. And this was reflected as in all three Olympics, and as a mean, it's definitely reflected a little bit better in this chart. So you had to be under 29.6 on the way out, and if you want to be on the podium, you're going to have to be out very, very fast. And if you're out in slower than 30, you're probably not going to be in the race. Last three 50s, splitting, and the order of importance. So here we have the three Olympics on different charts, and they all tell you pretty much the same thing. On the vertical axis is the number, the 50s, the first 50, the second 50, the third 50, and the fourth 50. Along the bottom axis is first through 8th place. So if we look at London, the bottom chart, the blue line is the first 50 for every single person. So that is by far the fastest. They're not fatigued, and they're pushing off of a wall, which has a wedge on it, and they can actually use their arms to push off the wall as well. So that by far is the fastest. There is no one out of the three Olympics that is faster on any other split other than the first one. In London, 6 of the 8 athletes went in order of the first 50 was the fastest, the second 50 was the second fastest, the third 50 was the third fastest, and the last 50 was the slowest. That, for the most part, is the results for all the Olympics, although there are a few variations. Specifically in Tokyo, the lady who placed second was our Canadian Kylie Mass, who 5 years ago in Rio was a bronze medalist in the 100 backstroke, and she was able to, over the last 5 years, to add the 200 backstroke to her repertoire. So she's got some great front end speed. So she did go in the order of her first 50 was the fastest, the second 50 was the second fastest, and her race strategy was to lead from the very beginning and see how that goes. It was only in the last 50 that she was passed by the Australian Kylie Mass, who had her last 50 be the second fastest. The last 50 lift. So there's no flip turn on the finish. It's a hand finish, so that should be faster. And it really comes down to closing speed, being able to have the legs to finish properly, to drive the stroke rate to finish to the wall. Is the last 50 lift a myth, or is it something real? So here we have the last 50 versus the third 50. So on all three charts, I separated them. And so the first chart, the first 50, the second 50, the third 50, and the fourth 50. And there's been a definite progression in race strategy that has changed in the last three Olympics. So the vertical axis is time, and the bottom axis is about the third 50 to the fourth 50. So if you look at London, there's only 2 ladies that were faster in the last 50 than the third 50, and then there was 4 in Rio, and in Tokyo there was 6. There's definitely a push to have more speed on the last wall to make that last 50 faster than the third one than there was at 2 Olympics ago. 100-meter splits. This is a great benchmark for next-gen athletes. The average from the last 3 Olympics is 3.09 seconds, and there's a little bit of an outlier in here. So here is the placings. So 100 split, the first 100 versus the second 100. And so on the vertical axis is the time in seconds, and this is the split difference. So in Tokyo, in blue, the lady who won the event, her split difference was just over 1.5 seconds, whereas Kylie Mass, who went out nice and fast and tried to control the race from the very beginning, is closer to 4-second difference in their splitting. So the tighter the splitting, the better. However, it's obviously within reason, because if you're not out fast enough, it won't make a difference. So roughly, the splitting gets wider as you get farther away from being on the podium. And the mean across the 3 different Olympics, or the 8 finalists for each Olympics, is 3.9 seconds. Practical applications. These are all very helpful for all next-gen athletes, and training sets should be and can be created based on results. The conclusions: the tighter splitting in the hundreds is much tighter than what the word on the street is. Coaches are not typically talking about a 3-second differential in the 100-meter split difference for a women's 200 back. Progression from semis from prelims to semis to finals, you must have that ability to keep lifting as you progress through the racing. Otherwise, you'll just be left behind. There is a direct relationship from the first 50 to the podium, because if you're not out fast enough, it won't matter how well you can close if you're not in the race. And the last 50 lift is not a myth. It's actually been happening. Recommendations. More data is needed, not just one country's athletes. Canada is creating its own information, but some of that information wasn't helpful, and it would be great to have it from FINA or some other mechanism out there. Benchmarks for next-gen athletes published for use would be wonderful. In Canada. So here's a race comparison report that Swimming Canada created on Kylie Mass in the 200 backstroke at finals, compared to what she did in semis. So in finals, she went 2.4 seconds than what she did in semifinals. This is information that I would love to have had for all the athletes for the 200 backstroke for the last 3 Olympics. It's not out there. Swimming Canada is working on its own information. They haven't even finished completing the stuff from 2020. They don't really have the information other than what the Canadians did in 2016, and they only have the information of what the Canadians did in 2012. So there isn't a database out there to grab all this information, although this would be very helpful information. This has stroke rates throughout the entire race, distance per stroke, and looking at the data, you will see that the distance per stroke for Kylie dropped a little bit as she went through the race. Her stroke rate, how fast her cadence, how fast she's moving her arms, also dropped as she went through the race. She went out fast. Her race strategy was to go out fast, control the race, and to hang on, and she did a great job. She just was out touched at the end. The 5 meters in and 15 meters out into all the turns is data that I would love to have had, and I can create a benchmark based on what Kylie did. I just can't create a benchmark based on the information that I could not get for all the athletes at the Olympics. Here we have Kylie compared to semifinals compared to the finals. The blue graphs below the line, she was faster in almost all the components of that entire race. Just at the end on the right side, she just started going a little bit slower as she got more fatigued. On this race segment, this is all about velocity and stroke rate and distance per stroke. So the velocity is in meters per second on the x-axis, and when she pushes off the wall, that's the fastest or the highest velocity she has for each 50. After that, she's slowing down. The 40s and the 41s and the 43s, that's her stroke rate, and her stroke rate is slowly going down as she progresses along each length. Again, excellent information that I would love to have. I can use our domestic information and use that for our athletes domestically, but I don't have that information internationally in order to be able to do a comparison for this assignment. Daily training environment recommendations: attention to splitting and training sessions. Use Tritonware or other wet mobile data collection devices to help you collect this information, and staged race simulation moments to help with the progression of prelims to semifinals. Thank you.